Alright, this is our first assignment for painting, and the assignment was to take the template, if you could print it on cardstock, and if you couldn't, if you've got thick paper or sketchbook paper, you can draw it out like I have drawn here. And I have a grid of 8 boxes, 4 rectangles, and 4 circles. And the assignment was to take line, shape, space, and texture, which I put across the top: line, shape, space, and texture. And the other 2 elements of design, which are color, which we're going to put on with paint, and value, which we will also use in paint depending on how light and how dark our colors get. And I'm going to start with the first row with watercolor here. You see that I've got, when I took my watercolor tray apart, I got paint here on it by accident, and I just wiped it off, and I am not going to sweat that mistake, because I could actually go back with white paint and cover up where I don't want it. And this is probably going to be acrylic up here for my demonstration anyway. So here is my watercolor tray. I asked you to get something less expensive. This is about a $30 tray. And you can see that I pour my colors out in the boxes, and I have 4 of these with different kinds of paint in it, not because I'm that particular, but because they were my mom's and she was primarily a watercolorist. So I've got them and I'm going to use them, and I still have some of her paint probably in some of the squares. I just pour out new paint, and as they empty up, if you don't have enough color, you can add more color with your tubes in that. And some people actually label the brand and label the color on the outside, so they don't get confused. And you could put tape on that and write on it if you so want. But I can see that I have several shades of brown. I've got a couple shades of yellow. I got different colors of blue. I've got a red here and a red here. This one has probably quinacridone in it with cad red medium. This one is more of a vermilion over here on the side, which is more of an orangey red. And then I have purple here, and then I will mix most everything else. So you can lay them out however it makes sense for you. And then I have my mixing ponds in the middle here. So most people don't want to start with a dirty paint center. So you can take your paper towel and wipe these out every time that you paint. I've got a little bit of a bright yellow there. I've got a little bit of a specific blue there. So I've just wiped this off with a paper towel. I've wet it in my watercolor, my water right there. Most watercolorists will have 2 watercolors, one to mix their color with of water, and one of clean water to paint with, because it gets quite dirty really early on a painting that you're interested in being an interesting painting. I've got so much water in here, I have more than one place, but because my water level is high, it's not going to work like that. So I'll just have to get up and empty it when it gets dirty, or not put as much water in, or have another rinse container. So usually I'm going to start with wetting an area and putting a color on. And you could use any wide brush to do this. The wider the better. And this is called wet on wet. And in a background, we primarily want our background to have a wash that's flat. And I'm just going to start with the yellow that I have here with my white brush and drop it on lightly. Now if I decided to go back and add white with watercolor, I could use a gouache in my paint, and I'll pull out my gouache and show you and do that. So I painted the background of that yellow, so I think I will make that in warm colors. So I'll use them yellows and reds and oranges. I'm going to do the same thing with the background, and I don't know if you can see, it depends how good my video is, but I've drawn in with my pencil. I can go back in with color pencil on top of these. I can go back in with my marker on top of these if I want there to be lines. But I'm just going to start with paint. I'm going to do a cerulean blue next. The space one, I think I'll do the cerulean blue because I want this to kind of have a sky look on it. So I'm just going to wet half of this and run cerulean blue into the sky. And if I want the value to be lighter, then I use less paint. But in watercolor, and there's not a whole lot of paint that I put on here, but in watercolor it's going to dry lighter than what you're applying the paint as. And if I was really worried about that little darker area there, and I'm finicky, I've taken my brush and a paper towel and I've made it a thirsty brush, and I'm going to dab up that little extra puddle of blue. Now you don't have any control of watercolor paint while your paint is wet, when this is wet on wet. So you either have to pull out your hair dryer or work in different areas. So that one was blue. Let's go with this one over here in texture, and I'm pre-wetting it, trying to keep it within the box. If it bleeds and I want it to be prettier, like I said, I can go back with white paint around the outsides when I'm done. So that one, then I'm going to come in maybe with a nice light mauve-ish purple that I have over here. It's kind of a lavender color, and I'm going to paint the whole box. Now unless you want a lot of white showing, it's easier to start with a colored background on whatever you're going to paint rather than to paint around things and paint, oh, here's purple here, here's yellow here, etc. To paint big areas of color first. So that's what I'm going to do in all of my paintings. And then I usually do that if I'm going to save white. I'll use Misket, or I'll use crayon, or I'll put tape or something to save an area rather than to try to paint around sections. Alright, and then the last one here, let's do a vermilion. And this one I'm not going to pre-wet, so I can show you the difference between what happens with it dry. And this would be much different if I was using a smaller brush. But because I am using a bigger brush, and you notice as I paint that I'm painting the same direction as I went before, because I want, this is called a wash, and when you're doing a wash, you either want it to go from darker to lighter or lighter to darker, or you want it to be smooth. And by going the same direction, I am moving a paint bubble across the edge, and then I took my thirsty brush and I'm cleaning up that last edge. So you can see this one looks more granule, maybe, that there's some granule in there. I like Winsor Newton paint because it does that type of separation, which happens in nature. I'm not sure which this one is, but it also isn't wet on wet. So I actually, with this big brush, was able to get it down in a smoother area. Okay, so while that dries,